Hello Keats fans, and welcome to the first video lesson about Keats' Lamia. It's a monster of a poem, quite literally. Lamia, now I think I've been saying it wrong for a long time. Lamia, so hang on, Lamia, saying that right? Lamia? Like Lamia? Or is it like Lamia? Lamia. Is it like Lamia? Or is it like Lamia? It's a bit, I think I've been always saying Lamia. Is it like Lamia? Oh, you know what? Like, everybody's got a different view on this. Everything online is American or whatever. You only need to write it, actually, so don't write too much. You know, it's absolutely fine. Now, before we get going, you'll probably want to make some notes. So have a pen, paper, and your anthology, or at least a copy of the poem, to hand. Now, when you first come to study a poem, you often begin by reading the poem through. Do not do this with Lamia. It's massive and it looks insane, so don't let yourself be intimidated. Instead, learn from this video about what's going on first, and it'll make lots of sense. Don't start by reading it. Now, it's an epic poem, longest poem in the collection that we're studying. An epic poem is a long narrative poem, but it also works well with our modern term as well, as being something massive and hugely important. It's both of those things. It is absolutely brilliant, but mad and really long. And ultimately, it is a gift for you in terms of our study of tragedy. You've got to remember that it is tragedy that we're studying for. There's tons of amazing resources online. I'll be giving you a guide to some of them later. But most of those resources aren't for tragedy. This is why we're studying it. Just always remember to keep your tragedy hat on. That's why we're studying it. Bear in mind as well, you don't need to know every single line of it. It's big, it's overwhelming. Just keep in mind you don't need to know every single bit of it. There are some really key moments, and there's lots of ways that you can use this poem. Okay, now before we start reading, you already know quite a lot about Keats. You know about the techniques and methods he uses. You know about his themes. Let's think about your other three poems and use that to help you understand Lamia. Isabella with the Pot of Basil, Eve of St. Agnes, and La Belle Dame sans Merci. Have a little flick over those in your notes. Just remind yourself, get it fresh. Can you write down, please, three of Keats's themes, maybe recurring themes, which you've detected from the poems that you've studied already? Give you a couple of minutes to think about that. Time's up. Did you get any of these? Love and death. Now, in most bullet point lists, these would be two separate points, wouldn't they? But for Keats, love and death are completely together. Deterioration, great people gone weak, old people fading out of life. Loads of deterioration in Keats so far as well. Passion that we've seen in all of our poems so far, that romantic love passion from the Knight at Arms, Madeline and Porphyro, Isabella, of course, and her devotion. The use of nature as a romantic poet, of course. Nature was something that he used as a tool to express himself. Remember the withering of nature in the Beldame, etc. Power relationships between men and women. Again, the Knight at Arms, the Beldame. Madeline, Porphyro, who's got the power in that relationship there. And, of course, Isabella's cruel brothers. Reality and dreams. Dreams Keats prefers like you wouldn't believe. Think about the dream section that Madeline's having in Eve of St. Agnes. It is much better than the reality that comes through. And Keats, as somebody who seemed to be aware of his own tragic fate to some extent, he always preferred dreams to reality. Fair enough, really, in some ways. And old age and youth, one coming through. Think about the party guest in Eve of St. Agnes, the beadsman of Angela. Old age and youth is something that's going to be really useful for us in Lamia as well. Okay, so you already know some things that are going to come up. Next, write down, please, 3 of Keats's methods. The first ones that spring to mind from the poems that you've studied already. Did you get any of these? Keats loves his medieval settings. We've had castles and knights and things like that so far. Fairy tale elements, mystical stories, supernatural. We've had fairies, children, and flying away into the night. References to mythology. Like a lot of romantic poets, a lot of it was about bringing back those classic stories, not just relying on your wit and your fancy wordplay like so many other writers of the day. Religious elements creeping in as well. Lots of praying, lots of appealing to God, lots of doom. If I had to pick one method that's Keats' favourite, it would be contrasts.
Keats loves a contrast.
Loves a contrast. His was a life of contrast, wasn't it? We mentioned love and death before. We've got passion and denial. We've got riches and poverty. Rational thought and wild, passionate emotion. Sensual imagery is one that crops up quite a lot through his poems as well, from the beautiful, luscious description of the characters. Think about Madeline undressing with that mermaid-style dress, the way she shimmers from the fairy's child and the beautiful day that they spend together. And there's more beauty in this one as well. He's got a classic set of metaphor, similes, alliteration. A lot of that feeds into his rhythm and his rhyme as well, which is so important. It's very natural. He makes it seem natural. He works hard, I think you can tell, to make it natural. You know, he said poetry should come as naturally as leaves to a tree, or it better not come at all. But actually, there's a very strict set of rhyming patterns, of meter, of iambs, all the way through his poetry, and Lamia is no different. Ambiguity as well. We don't entirely know what happened at the end of the Eve of St. Agatha. Keats, he doesn't feel the need to absolutely pin everything down. He does like to change things from time to time. So, ambiguity. Again, if you know these, and some of them are on your list, that's fantastic, because you're going into the study of Lamia with lots of knowledge already, which is fantastic. And the good news is that Lamia is like a greatest hits of Keats. It's the all-time greatest hits of Keats, featuring everything from contrast, mythology, love, and death. Brought to you by Charles Brown Records, released soon on Parchment and Quill. Now let's get some background for Lamia for this poem. This was a really key year for Keats, 1819, and this is what he actually wrote himself to his brother in a letter. I've been reading over a part of a short poem I've composed lately called Lamia, and I'm certain there is a sort of fire in it that must take hold of people some way. Give them either pleasant or unpleasant sensation. What they want is a sensation of some sort. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't really mind if it's pleasant or unpleasant. Two complete contrasts. That just sums Keats up, and I think you actually get both of those sensations in the poem, personally, but you can decide on what you think. Now, 1819, a really key year. Living with Charles Brown, you saw this in Bright Star, the film, portrayed really well, I think, at that time. It was his most productive year. It was one of the most productive years of any writer in English literature history. It's absolutely insane how much he produced in this year. His brother Tom had died. His other brother was in loads of financial difficulties. And he was completely in love with Fanny. He was obsessed with her. But it was clear that they weren't going to be able to marry because of the money situation. And she had to carry on, basically, flirting, going out to the dances. You've seen this in Bright Star really, really well. And that really kind of crushed Keats, to be honest with you, although we think she probably did have a huge amount of affection for him as well. And there they are, these three characters. We do have three main characters in Lamia. I'm just going to put that out there and get you thinking about that a little bit now. Okay, so Lamia is not a character that Keats has created himself. She is in fact a famous figure from Greek mythology, so an ancient tale, a character from ancient tales, and those tales have changed a bit over time. Take a look at these four images here. What do you notice about them? Have a think. So the notion of water comes across in a few of them. Lamia by the pond, the serpent woman as well. It's intense staring between male and female character at the bottom there, and a sense of beauty in all of them. If you look at Herbert Draper's one on the right there, you notice that she has a kind of skirt that wouldn't look out of place on Madeline, perhaps, in the Eve of St. Agnes. And if you look at the top one by Annalee Merritt, Lamia, the serpent woman, she's given that title there. So there's something supernatural, monstrous about her, although she's beautiful. And again, if you look at the Draper on the right, entitled The Lamia, so not necessarily Lamia, The Lamia, so suggesting that she's become a kind of stock character, a figure in herself. Okay. If you look at the one at the bottom, kind of Medusa, like in terms of her hair, that will be important later on. The top left there, John William Waterhouse's poem, could absolutely be a picture of La Belle Dame as well, by the lakeside. So, Lamia Mythology Fact File. Make some notes, please, guys. So, she presides in ancient Greek mythologies, and these have been updated through the ages. She was originally a queen, Queen of Libya, famed as a great beauty, and beloved by her people. Now, this isn't really her fault, right? She had an affair with Zeus, but Zeus is the most powerful god, ruler of Olympus. Not like she had a huge amount of choice in the matter, to be honest with you, but anyway, she bore Zeus children. Hera, Zeus's wife, was furious about this and killed those children out of jealousy. Lamia went insane with grief. And the story kind of develops that, envious of other mothers, she ate their children. So she became this kind of monstrous child-eating woman. Now, because this has evolved over time, this story, so do the details. Her appearance varies. She's some kind of shapeshifter in most versions of this story. She has eyes that she can remove. In one version of the story, Hera took her eyes out and Zeus gave her them back. But the notion of her as a serpent woman is going to be important for us in Lamia, and was in the picture there as well. She's also a seductress. A couple of centuries, around the time of the 9th century, she became a kind of supernatural threat to marriage. She seduces men and she ruins them. Later on, and quite recently, and still in some European countries, the story is used as a threat to children. Go to bed or the Lamia will come and eat you. Like a terrifying kind of like boogie woman type creature. And one thing that's clear is that it's the wrongs to Lamia that created her monstrosity, and her repeated monstrous actions transform her into a monster. Later traditions suggest that there are lots of these Lamiae. They were like Lamia, whatever. These were monsters in folklore that were a little bit like vampires. They seduced young men, fed on their blood. And that makes her out to be extremely monstrous, doesn't it? But actually, Keats' presentation of Lamia, it differs quite a lot from that. She is nowhere near as monstrous as you might think, but we do see a lot of those elements coming across. I mentioned Medusa there. Does she remind you of any other characters in literature and mythology? A couple of minutes, have a think. Jot them down. Yeah, Medusa, beautiful snake-headed Gorgon, who tries to get people to look at her and turns them to stone when she does. Beautiful but extremely dangerous. That fits in with this stereotype, this stock character of this femme fatale, which we see in lots of different texts. We spoke about that a little bit before. The devil itself, himself, tempting and ruining. Eve, bit of a left field one here, but as a lady who brings about ruin with these kind of biblical connotation that Keats loves, worth keeping your eye on. And the belle dame herself as well, somebody beautiful who brings a man to ruin. And there's loads more as well. Now, Lamia is just one of 4 important characters in the poem. Okay, get your head around these before you read it. First of all, Hermes.
Hermes, I know that name from somewhere. That must be my doorbell. That must be the post. Is there? Okay, right, yes. That's a post for me. Let's take a little look. Oh, of course, Hermes is the name of a delivery company. Of course it is. Let me just see.
Now, Hermes was one of the Greek gods, effectively the messenger of the gods, who leaves Olympus, the home of the gods, in search of a beautiful nymph, this beautiful female creature. He's trying to find her so he can love her and be with her, etc., etc. And he appears in the very early section of the poem and is probably the least important of the 4 characters that we meet. Lysias. Lysias. Kind of Lysias, I guess, because it's like he's delicious. He's delicious. Anyway, Lysias is a young and handsome Corinthian man. This is Greece. We're talking about Corinth as an area of Greece, who is looking for love. And Apollonius, a philosopher, real person, I think, from history. You know how it is with the Greeks. A philosopher, a wise advisor, and a former tutor to Lysias, who's an old man at the time of this poem here.
So he's got like the name Apollo in it, Apollonius. And Apollo is a god of lots of things, but reason and study and music and prophecy, science and thinking. And here's my daughter's bike, and you can see it's branded Apollo. You wouldn't want like the god of like luck and chance to be a bike brand, so you can see why they picked the name and why Keats has picked Apollonius as well.
Your task. Predict the plot. We've spoken about Lamia. You now know a bit about Hermes, Lysias, and Apollonius. Write a list of bullet point predictions. What do you think will happen in this poem based on that knowledge? Go. Now think about those images you looked at before and have a look at this one here as well. Predict the plot based on these images. What themes or ideas are here in this beautiful painting that we've already discussed in our analysis of previous poems? What ideas about gender and relationships between men and women does this image present? Okay, so Lysias here absolutely appears like the knight at arms. He's in full solid armour. Lamia, look at this dress with its animal-like print on it. The pose as well, she's looking up at him with this pleading gesture, and he's looking down at her, completely smitten, as though he's forgotten everything about the world. Tempting him with her beauty. You can see she's half clothed, as she is in most of the pictures that we've seen already. Lysias, a handsome guy, but he looks vulnerable and weak in this pose, doesn't he? Keats's female characters have many of these attributes. Let's think. How could we consider them victims? Who would you pick? I would pick Isabella. Her situation clearly marks her out as being a victim of the patriarchy. She loses Lorenzo, the one she loves, and is left, obviously, in despair. What about manipulative? La Belle Dame was the one that I picked here. She gets her mysterious, magical way with a knight at arms, and he's taken from that position of high status, being a knight, to a kind of zombie wreck of a man by the end of it. What about ambiguous? Yeah, I'll pick Madeline as well. We don't totally know her feelings about Porphyro, about how she was able to reconcile that dream vision of him with reality, and of course that ending. Is it maybe the closest we get in a Keats poem to have an ending that is, if not happy, at least not an absolute disaster? Maybe. So again, you already know quite a lot about Keats's female characters. I would suggest that Lamia is actually all of these: victim, manipulative, and presented in quite an ambiguous fashion as well. Keep your eye on that as we go through. Now we're going to look at the actual plot. You can interact with this bit of the lesson in different ways. One way would be pause the video at intervals and draw pictures of what's happening, if you're somebody that works in that really useful visual way. Pause it at intervals and try to recite it back again. Or just listen to me talking through it a few times, trying to make sense of it. You could print it off, highlight sections, come up with your own coding. It's just a useful way of getting to know the plot first, because as I've said, it is big and it can be intimidating. Okay, here we go. The god Hermes, having fallen deeply in love with a nymph who has hidden herself from him, hears a voice complaining of being imprisoned in a snake's body. The speaker turns out to be a beautiful serpent. This serpent tells Hermes that she knows that he's looking for the nymph, and she offers to make the nymph, to whom she's given the power of invisibility, visible to him, providing that he will restore her to her woman's body. They make a kind of bargain between them. Hermes gladly appears. This nymph becomes visible to Hermes, and the serpent, Lamia, turns into a beautiful woman and then disappears. Okay, that bit of story, that's it for Hermes. We don't hear any more about him. That's the first little section there. Then Lamia, her story truly begins here. She is this serpent-termed woman. And she tells us that when she was back in her snake-like state, she had the power to send her spirit wherever she wished. On one of her journeys, she'd seen a Corinthian youth, Lysias, Corinth is in Greece, so it's a guy from Greece. Okay. Now as woman, she reappears and stands at the side of the road, along with that she knows Lysias will come on his way to Corinth. When he arrives, she speaks to him, she addresses him, asks him if he will leave her all alone where she is. Are you going to leave me here, are you? Lysias looks at her and at once falls violently in love with her. Complete love at first sight. Together they walk to Corinth, and they make their abode in the mansion which she leads him to. There they live together as man and wife, avoiding the company of others. Not actually married yet, but they live together so happily. They live happily in the blisses of love until, that is, Lysias decides that they ought to marry and invite all of their friends to the marriage festival. Okay, as you do. Lamia is strongly opposed to this plan, but his persistence at last wins her reluctant consent. She agrees, but only on the condition that Lysias won't invite the philosopher, his mentor, Apollonius, to the marriage feast. She says, I don't want him here, okay? I don't have any friends, I don't have any relatives, I don't want anybody to come, but I don't want you to invite him. Okay. Lysias is off then, inviting all of his family, all of his kinsfolk to the wedding, and Lamia, with their magic powers, summons invisible servants who decorate the banquet room and furnish it with foods of every kind. Think like Be Our Guest from Beauty and the Beast, yeah? When Lysias' guests arrive, Lamia's got no friends, she tells him, they marvel at the splendour of the mansion. We can't believe this is here. None of them had ever known that there was such a magnificent palace there. Among the guests is Apollonius, who's come along uninvited to the wedding. How rude. At the height of the wedding feast, Apollonius begins to stare fixedly at Lamia, as if he knows what she is. She grows pale and exhibits extreme discomfort. She makes no answer to Lysias' agonised questions as to what's going on with her, what ails her. The feasting and the music come to a stop. Turning to Apollonius, Lysias commands him to cease staring at Lamia, but he replies, Fool! From every ill of life have I preserved thee to this day, and shall I see thee made a serpent's prey? So he calls her out as being a snake. Looking at Lamia again, he utters two words, a serpent, and at these words, Lamia vanishes. At the moment of her disappearance, Lysias dies. So, super happy, then really. Okay, can you now try, please, to learn that, whatever method that I outlined at the beginning, try to learn the plot, whether it's just pausing the video now and like telling the plot to your cat or your dog, or another human, or writing down a little version of it, just try your best.